Welcome to Chapter 6, Intentional Torts and Business Torts. A wide variety of intended acts can have unintended consequences. With intentional torts, the defendant may not have intended to harm the plaintiff, but her deliberate actions have resulted in alleged injury. Anticipating the harm that can result enables us to consider carefully the actions themselves. Consider the case of Jane Doe and Nancy Roe versus Lynn Mills. Late one night, an anti-abortion protester named Robert Thomas climbed into a dumpster located behind the Women's Advisory Center, an abortion clinic. He found documents indicating that the plaintiffs were soon to have abortions at the clinic. Thomas gave the information to Lynn Mills. The next day, Mills and Sister Louise Mitterraj created the signs using the women's names, indicating that they were about to undergo abortions and urging them not to, quote, kill their babies, unquote. Doe and Roe, not their real names of course, sued, claiming intentional infliction of emotional distress, as well as breach of privacy. The trial court dismissed the lawsuit, ruling that the defendant's conduct was not extreme and outrageous. The plaintiffs appealed. The question is this: have the plaintiffs made a valid claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress? The dismissal was reversed and remanded for trial. The objectionable aspect of the defendant's conduct does not relate to their views on abortion or their right to express those views, but rather to the fact that the defendants gave unreasonable and unnecessary publicity to purely private matters involving the plaintiffs. We believe this is the type of case that might cause an average member of the community, upon learning of the defendant's conduct, to exclaim, "outrageous." What are the elements of intentional infliction of emotional distress? A plaintiff must prove extreme and outrageous conduct that caused her serious emotional harm. What are the elements of intentional infliction of emotional distress? A plaintiff must prove extreme and outrageous conduct that caused her serious emotional harm. According to the appeals court, how does the law determine whether a defendant's conduct is sufficiently extreme to constitute the tort? The court said that the elements have probably been established if the average member of the community would exclaim, "outrageous." Do you think that the defendants have a First Amendment right to express their opinions? Absolutely. Then you may wonder, how can the appeals court reverse the court's dismissal? The court acknowledged that the defendants have a right to express their views on abortion. What they do not have a right to do is publicize the names of these women and the fact they were about to undergo abortions. That is purely private information of no interest to the general public, and that in turn means that the defendants had no right to divulge it. Does the appeals court ruling mean that the plaintiffs have proven their case of intentional infliction of emotional distress? No, the ruling simply means that the plaintiffs are entitled to a jury trial. The court is ruling that the trial court should not have dismissed the case. A jury could legitimately consider this conduct extreme and outrageous. Now it will be up to a jury to decide whether the conduct really does meet that standard. Tort simply means wrong. A tort is a violation of a duty imposed by civil law. An example of defamation is making a false statement about someone, written or verbal. An example of negligence is performing wrong surgery. Stealing a client away from a competitor is an example of interference with contract. And offering to sell something that doesn't exist is an example of fraud. Criminal law is behavior classified as dangerous to society. It's prosecuted by the government whether the victim wants to prosecute or not, and any monetary award goes to the government. Contract law is based on a breach of an agreement between two parties. The victim prosecutes and receives compensation or restitution. Tort law is based on an obligation imposed by the law with no agreement needed between the parties. The victim prosecutes and receives compensation or restitution. Intentional torts does not require an intention to harm the victim, only an intention to perform the act which causes the injury. Intentionally throwing an object but not meaning to hit anyone is a tort if it causes injury to someone. This includes business torts, a category of torts perpetuated almost exclusively by business entities. Cottle versus Betts. Cottle worked at a Betts Lincoln Mercury dealership. During an office party, many of the employees, including President Betts, were playing with an electric auto condenser, which gave a slight electric shock when touched. Some employees played catch with the condenser. Betts shocked Cottle on the back of his neck and then chased him around, holding the condenser. The shock later caused Cottle to suffer headaches, pass out, and eventually require surgery on a nerve in his neck. Even after the surgery, Cottle had a slight numbness on one side of his head. He sued Betts for battery. Betts defended by saying that it was all horseplay and that he had never intended to cause injury. What would you rule? Although the trial court ruled for Betts and the Court of Appeals affirmed, the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled for Cottle. The court held that it was irrelevant that Betts had shown no malice toward Cottle nor intended to hurt him. Betts intended the physical contact with Cottle. Although he neither expected nor could reasonably have foreseen the medical damage Cottle suffered, Betts was still liable for all the consequences of the physical contact he did intend. You may reason that a defendant cannot be liable for an intentional tort if he didn't intend the harm. Betts, all in fun, shocked Cottle on the neck with an electric auto condenser, resulting in chronic injuries to Cottle. Cottle sued Betts for battery, and after trial and intermediate appellate court decision for Betts, the Louisiana Supreme Court finally got it right and ruled for Cottle. Betts' lack of actual intent to harm Cottle was irrelevant. He intended to shock Cottle with the condenser and is liable for the consequences.